The night was calm. Not movie calm, real calm. The kind where the ocean looks like a sheet of dark glass and the sky feels wide and patient. Titanic moved forward without hurry, cutting through the Atlantic as if the water had agreed to step aside. No drama, no alarms, just a steady glide, like a giant that knew it had all the time in the world. From far away, the ship looked almost unreal. Lights glowing softly, smoke rising slow from the funnels, music floating out into the cold air, thin but warm. Titanic did not feel like a ship that could ever be in trouble. It felt like a promise made of steel. People on board felt that too. Up on the open decks, the night breeze was sharp but clean. Some passengers stood wrapped in coats, looking out at the stars. Others leaned on railings, talking quietly, as if loud voices might disturb the ocean. Laughter appeared now and then, soft and brief, like it knew better than to stay too long. Inside the ship, the engines worked with a low, steady rhythm. Not loud, not angry, more like a deep breath that never got tired. You could feel it through the floor if you stood still long enough. A gentle vibration, reassuring, almost friendly. Titanic was very good at making people feel safe. It was late, but not everyone was asleep. Some people never sleep well on the first nights of a journey. New bed, new sounds, new thoughts. Others stayed awake on purpose, not wanting to miss a single moment of this floating city. When you are on the largest ship in the world, sleep can wait. Down through the ship, away from the fancy rooms and wide staircases, life moved at a quieter pace. Third-class passengers were settling in for the night in their own way. No grand halls here, no orchestra drifting through the walls. Just people close together, sharing space and air and stories. For many of them, this night felt important. Some sat on their bunks, boots kicked off, rubbing tired feet. Others lay flat on their backs, staring up at metal. Ceilings, counting breaths, counting days, counting hopes. A few still talked in low voices, switching between languages like it was the most normal thing in the world. English mixed with Irish, Swedish with Italian, words bending and borrowing from each other. It sounded like home, or at least like the idea of home. Children were the first to give in to sleep. They always are. A child does not neigh, luxury to rest. A blanket, a familiar voice, and the steady motion of the ship were enough. Some clutched small bags or toys brought from far away. Others slept with fists closed tight, as if holding on to dreams they were not ready to drop. Adults took longer. A man lay awake thinking about work he had never seen but already felt tired from. A woman whispered a prayer she had learned as a child. The words worn smooth from use. A couple shared quiet plans about a future that felt close now. So close it almost scared them. Titanic did that too. It made the future feel near. The air down here was warm and heavy with life. The smell of food from earlier meals still lingered faintly. Bread, soup, coffee that had been stretched to serve many cups. It was not fancy, but it was filling. And for most, it was more than they were used to on land. Someone joked softly about how even the ship's walls looked expensive. Another replied that if the walls were rich, maybe some of it would rub off on them. A few tired laughs followed, small humour, the kind that does not ask for much. Above them, far above, the ship continued its smooth journey. The stars did not move, the sea did not complain, the engines did not change their song. Everything stayed just as it was meant to be. This was a night that felt earned. Many of these passengers had waited years for this moment. Papers signed, money saved coin by coin, goodbyes said too many times. The journey itself had already been long before they ever stepped on the ship. Compared to that, this crossing felt easy, almost gentle, some people thought. About the morning to come. Fresh light, fresh air. Another day closer to land they had only seen in pictures or heard about in stories. Others tried not to think ahead at all. Thinking too much made the heart restless. Tonight was for being still. The ship creaked now and then, the normal sound of metal adjusting to cold water. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden, just the quiet conversation between steel and sea. Anyone who noticed it barely gave it a thought. Why would they? This was Titanic. The world had said so. Newspapers had said so. Engineers had said so. And the ship itself said so with every smooth mile forward. Confidence was built into every rivet. Somewhere, a door closed softly. Somewhere else, footsteps faded. A lantern dimmed. A final whisper turned into a long, even breath. Oh. Nay, by one, the lower decks settled into sleep. Not deep sleep. Journey sleep. The kind where dreams come and go, where the body rests but the mind keeps one ear open. Ships teach you that. You learn to trust them, but not completely. Not yet. Still, comfort found its way in. The ocean outside remained calm, as if it had decided to behave. The sky stayed clear. The ship stayed steady. The night hell. Everything in place. If you had walked through the ship at that moment, you would have felt it. A strange balance. So many lives moving together, yet each one private. So much space above, so many people below, all sharing the same direction. No one felt special, no one felt forgotten. Not in that moment. This was just a quiet night on the world's greatest ship. A night full of small thoughts, tired bodies, soft laughter, and steady hope. A night that asked nothing from anyone. And for now the sea agreed. They were not famous. They were not rich. Most history books did not pause long enough to learn their names, but they were real people. Third-class passengers were the heartbeat of the ship. Not loud, not shiny, just steady. They came from many places, carried many accents, and shared. One big reason for being there. They wanted a different life. Most of them were immigrants. Farmers, labourers, maids, carpenters, tailors, people who worked with their hands and trusted their backs to get them through the day. They came from Ireland, Sweden, Italy, Norway, Finland, England, and many small villages that maps barely noticed. Some had never seen the ocean before, others had seen it, lie from a distance, like a thing meant for braver people. Now they were crossing it on the largest ship ever built. That alone felt strange, and exciting, and a little funny if you thought about it too much. Many were young, early 20s, strong arms, nervous smiles. The kind of people who believe effort can change everything. They carried small bags, not because they owned little, but because they had chosen what mattered most. Others were families. Parents with tired eyes and children who asked too many questions. Mothers who packed extra clothes just in case. Fathers who tried to look calm even when their thoughts ran ahead of them. Whole lives folded into a few suitcases and hope doing most of the heavy lifting. There were also older passengers. Not many, but enough to notice. P.O. Plel, who had waited too long or lost something back home, simply decided it was now or never. They moved slower, thought longer, watched more than they spoke. Third class was not one type of person, it was many types, sharing the same ticket level. That ticket mattered more than people like to admit. A third-class ticket was affordable, but not cheap. For many, it cost months of savings. Some sold land. Some borrowed money. Some promised to send money back once they made it. That small piece of paper was heavy with responsibility. Still, it was the only way forward. America was the idea that pulled them across the water. Not the real place. The idea, a place where work meant progress, where children could grow without limits, where names could change and so could futures. No one expect. Ted Easy days. They expected better ones. Life before the ship had not been kind to most of them. Work was hard, pay was low, weather decided too much, politics decided more. Being poor was not dramatic, it was just constant. Titanic, in comparison, felt almost gentle. And that is important to understand. For third-class passengers, Titanic was not a downgrade, it was an upgrade. Warm beds, regular meals, clean water. Even shared spaces felt generous compared to what many had known. They noticed things others ignored. They noticed how solid the walls felt, how bright the lights were, how the ship did not shake or complain. They noticed the order, the schedules, the sense that someone, somewhere, knew what they were doing. Some joked that the ship was nicer than their homes. Others did not. Joke. They simply nodded and accepted it as true. Languages mixed freely. You could hear 5 different tongues in one short walk. Sometimes people did not understand each other's words, but meaning found a way. A smile, a hand gesture, a shared laugh when the ship swayed just enough to make everyone grab something. Humour travelled fast, especially tired humour. Someone joked that if the ship was unsinkable, then maybe it could also cook better food. Someone else said if it could do that, they would never get off. Laughter followed, light and quick, then faded back into normal life. Faith was common among them, not loud faith, quiet faith. Small prayers said before sleep, medals worn under shirts, hands folded without much show. Faith was not about miracles, it was about strength, education. Levels varied. Some could read and write well, others could not. It did not matter much here. Everyone understood effort. Everyone understood risk. There was pride too, deep, quiet pride. They were not asking for pity. They were not running away in shame. They were choosing something. That choice mattered to them. Even if the world did not notice, they noticed. Children played without caring about class or destination. They made games out of narrow spaces and loud echoes. To them, the ship was a moving playground. The adults watched them with soft smiles and heavy thoughts. A child could belong anywhere. An adult knew better. Third-class passengers were used to being overlooked. Shops ignored them. Officials rushed them. Employers replaced them easily. Being unseen was normal. Titanic did OT changed that completely, but it softened it. On this ship, at least, everyone was moving in the same direction. That shared movement mattered. At night, when voices lowered and bodies rested, their thoughts sounded similar. Will it work? Will we be enough? Will this choice be worth it? These questions did not need answers right away. The ocean was wide. Time felt stretched. They were not thinking about class divisions. Not in that moment. They were thinking about arrival, about stepping onto land with nothing but possibility in front of them. Some dreamed clearly, jobs, homes, schools. Others kept dreams small on purpose. Tomorrow, then the next day, one step at a time. If you listened closely, you could hear it in the way they spoke. Not fear, not excitement either, something steadier. Determination mixed with patience. That was who they were. Not numbers, not labels, not just third class. They were people who believed movement could change life. People who trusted a ship, a sea, and themselves enough to try. And on that night, as Titanic carried them forward, they rested inside that belief. Buying a third-class ticket was not a casual thing. No one woke up one morning and sighed, let's cross the ocean today. It was a decision that sat in the mind for months, sometimes years, before it ever reached the hands. For many people, the ticket came after long evenings at a table with numbers written on scrap paper. Coins counted more than once, bills folded and unfolded until the corners went soft, every expense questioned, every small luxury removed. New shoes could wait, better food could wait, the ticket but not. A third-class ticket cost far less than the others, but less did not mean easy. For a working family, it was still a mountain. Some paid with savings, some borrowed from relatives who hoped they would be paid back someday. Some promised to send money home the moment work was found. That promise carried weight. The ticket itself was simple. No gold edges, no fancy design, just paper, printed words, and official stamps that made it real. Names were written carefully, sometimes with help, sometimes with spelling guessed at. A name written wrong still meant the same thing. It meant passage. For many, this was the first official document they had ever owned. That mattered more than comfort. Buying the ticket also meant facing rules. Third-class passengers did not just buy a place on the ship. They bought into inspections, questions, and waiting lines that moved slower than anyone liked. Health checks were part of the deal. Eyes examined, hands checked. Questions asked in quick, sharp tones. Are you healthy? Can you work? Do you have money? Simple questions, heavy answers. People worried about coughing at the wrong time, about looking too tired, about saying the wrong thing. One small mistake could mean no travel at all. Fear sat quietly in many chests while they stood in line, trying to look strong and calm at the same time. Children were watched closely. Parents held them tighter than usual, not out of affection, but out of worry. A sick child could stop everything. A healthy-looking child felt like good luck. Once approved, the relief was real. Shoulders relaxed. Breaths came easier. Some smiled for no reason at all. Others stayed serious, as if smiling too soon might break something. The ticket was often kept in the safest place possible. A pocket inside a coat, a cloth pouch tied tight, wrapped in paper then wrapped again. Losing it was unthinkable. That small piece of paper held a future. People looked at it often, not because it changed, but because they needed to see it was still there, still real. Buying a third-class ticket also meant accepting limits. Everyone knew this. The space would be shared. The comforts basic, privacy rare. No one pretended otherwise. Expectations were kept low on purpose. Low expectations survived better. Some joked about it. As long as the ship floats, I'm happy. Others said nothing and nodded. Silence was agreement. There were travel agents involved, though many passengers did not fully trust them. Big words were used, promises were made. Not all of them were clear. People nodded anyway. When you want something badly enough, you learn to nod. Sometimes tickets were bought in groups. Neighbors traveling together. Friends leaving the same town. Entire families linked by names written one after another. That made the risk feel smaller. Shared risk always does. Other times people bought tickets alone. Those were the quiet ones. They did not talk much in offices or waiting rooms. They held their papers tightly and kept their thoughts to themselves. Leaving alone took a different kind of courage. The moment of purchase was rarely dramatic. No applause, no music, just a transaction. Money passed. One way. Paper passed the other. A few words exchanged. And just like that, a life changed direction. After buying the ticket, waiting began, waiting for the travel date, waiting for transport to the port, waiting for the moment when standing still would turn into moving forward. Waiting has a way of stretching time until it feels heavier than action. People talked about the ship. Everyone did. E-size, the strength, the safety. Even third-class passengers heard the stories. Maybe not all the details, but enough to feel reassured. Being on a strong ship mattered when you were trusting it with everything. Some imagined what the ship would look like inside. Others tried not to imagine at all. Imagination could be kind, but it could also make reality feel smaller. Better to let things arrive. As they were, packing followed. Not much, but carefully chosen. Clothes for work, clothes for church. Photos folded small. Letters kept close. Tools sometimes, if allowed. Anything that could help start over. Everything else was left behind. On the day of travel, the ticket felt heavier than before. Not because it weighed more, but because it now had a date. Time had stopped being an idea and star. Ted being a schedule. People checked the ticket again and again. Name, class, destination. It all had to be right. A mistake now would be cruel. There was pride mixed into the fear. Buying the ticket meant saying, I am doing this, not thinking about it, not dreaming about it, doing it. That mattered. Third-class passengers did not expect kindness from systems. They expected fairness at best. So, when the ticket worked as promised, when the gate opened, when the ship waited, it felt like a small victory. Some crossed themselves before boarding. Some kissed family members goodbye one last time. Some stood very still, as if trying to memorize the feeling of being on land. The ticket stayed close, always close. It was not luxury. It was not comfort. It was permission. Permission to leave. Permission to try. Permission to step onto something larger than the life behind them. For third-class passengers, buying the ticket was not about where they would sleep or what they would eat. It was about movement, about change, about trusting that the risk was worth taking. And once the ticket was bought, there was no going back. Going down into third class was not dramatic. No grand moment, no moo. Sick, changing tone. It happened step by step, stair by stair, like entering a place that did not need to announce itself. You felt it before you fully noticed it. The air changed first. Up on the higher decks, the air was sharp and cold, full of sea and night. As you moved down, it grew warmer, heavier, more lived in. It smelled like wool coats, leather shoes, soap, and people who had been awake too. Oh, long. The stairs were solid, strong under the feet. Titanic did not feel fragile anywhere, and that mattered. Each step down felt safe, even if it felt unfamiliar. Hands brushed the railings, fingers cold at first, then warming as you went lower. Lights followed you, but they softened, still bright enough, just not proud about it. No sparkling fixtures, no polished shine, just steady bulbs doing their job without asking for attention. For many passengers, this walk down was their first real reminder of class. Not because anyone said anything, not because signs shouted rules, just because space changed its shape. Hallways narrowed, ceilings lowered slightly, sounds stayed closer, bouncing back faster. Footsteps echoed more here, like the ship wanted to remind you that you were inside it. OT above it, people carried bags close to their bodies. Not heavy bags, just enough to matter. Someone laughed when a suitcase bumped a wall. Another person apologized even though it was clearly the wall's fault. You passed faces that looked like yours, tired, curious, calm but alert. No one rushed. There was nowhere to rush to. The ship was moving whether you hurried or not. Some stopped to read. Signs, just to be sure. Deck numbers, arrows, everything written clearly, which helped when you did not trust your own sense of direction. Titanic was big, very big. Getting lost felt easy if you let your mind wander. A child ran ahead, then stopped, unsure. A parent called softly. The child came back pretending they meant to do that all along. Adults smiled. They remembered being young enough to think the world was still small. Doors opened and closed. Not slammed, not whispered. Just normal sounds of people settling into a place that was not yet home but needed to feel like one. Rooms appeared in rows, bunks built into walls, clean, simple, strong. You could tell they were made to last, not to impress. Some people tested the beds by sitting down slowly, as if the ship might object. D not. There was comfort in that. Luggage found corners, coats found hooks, shoes lined up without anyone asking them to. Order appeared naturally. When space is shared, people learn quickly. The noise level stayed low, not because of rules, but because of understanding. Everyone knew someone nearby was tired. Everyone knew tomorrow would be another long day of waiting and moving and thinking. Small conversations happened everywhere. Where are you from? How long did it take you to get here? Is this your first time on a ship? Questions like these did not need perfect answers. They just needed honesty. Voices carried accents that turned simple words into something warm. People listened even when they did not fully understand. Listening was enough. The ship made its own sounds too. Oh, a steady hum from deep within. Pipes clicking softly, metal settling into cold water. None of it sounded wrong. It sounded busy, alive, like a place doing exactly what it was built to do. Some passengers paused at the bottom of the stairs and took a breath, not because they were tired, but because something felt official now. Above decks was still exciting. Below decks felt real. Here, there W. Air, no wide windows showing the sea, no stars to count. The world outside became an idea instead of a view. In its place, there were people, walls, and routine, and that was fine. For many, routine felt safe, predictable. After long journeys across land, after nights spent in crowded rooms and stations, this felt organized, clean, reliable. Someone joked that the ship was like a moving village, and others said it was better than their old village because this one had hot water. That got a few laughs. Humor down here did not try too hard. It showed up when it wanted to. Walking further in, you noticed how quickly strangers became familiar. Not friends exactly, but known. You recognized faces. You nodded. You shared space without asking permission. That is what shared travel does. It shortens distance between people. Children adapted fast. They found corners to explore, echoes to test with their voices, games to invent out of nothing. Adults let them, within reason. A quiet child was not always a happy child. Some parents pointed out rules gently, others relied on looks. Children understood both. Bedding rustled, blankets folded and unfolded. Someone tried to make their bunk feel perso. Nal by placing a photo nearby. Someone else decided not to unpack at all, just in case. Everyone adjusted in their own way. Time moved differently here. Without windows, without changing light, hours felt softer, less urgent. Meals and bells would handle structure later. For now there was just the slow settling of people into place. A woman touched the wall as she walked, running her fingers along. The cool surface. Not because she needed support, but because she wanted to feel something solid. The ship gave that freely. Another passenger leaned against a post and closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, long enough to breathe, not long enough to sleep. He opened them again and smiled faintly as if reassured. Being below deck was not punishment. It was simply position. No one here XP. Acted luxury. They expected honesty, a place to rest, a place to wait, a place that would carry them forward without asking too many questions. And that is exactly what they found. As the night settled deeper, movement slowed. Footsteps became rare. Voices dropped even lower. The ship's hum grew more noticeable, like a background thought you only hear when everything else quiets down. People lay be. Sat still. Closed eyes. The journey had truly begun now, not with cheers or whistles, but with acceptance, with the simple act of being where you were meant to be. Below deck, life did not shine. It endured, calmly, patiently. And for those who had chosen this path, that was more than enough. The living spaces of third class were simple, not sad, not cruel, just honest. They did not try to impress anyone, and maybe that was their strength. When passengers first really looked around, they noticed how practical everything was. No wasted space. No decorations pretending to be something else. The rooms were built for people who needed rest, not praise. Most third-class rooms held several passengers, sometimes 4, sometimes more. Bunk beds were fixed into the walls, stacked neatly like shelves made for sleep. The frames were metal, strong and steady. They did not creak much, which people appreciated. A bed that complains all night is hard to trust. Mattresses were thin but clean. Blankets were rough but warm. Pillows were small, but they did their job. After long days of travel before even reaching the ship, these beds felt better than expected. Privacy was limited. Everyone knew. That before arriving. Curtains were rare. Personal space was mostly an idea you carried inside your head. If you wanted quiet, you learned to create it by turning inward. People changed clothes carefully. Not shy exactly, just respectful. Backs turned, movements timed. No one wanted to make things uncomfortable. Shared space worked best when everyone tried a little. The walls were plain, painted light colours that made the rooms feel brighter than they really were. Lamps hung from the ceiling, casting a steady glow. Not harsh, not soft. Just enough to see without thinking about it. Some passengers touched the walls, tapping lightly, testing the thickness. Solid, reassuring. This ship was not pretending to be strong. It was strong. Storage was limited, so people got creative. Bags slid under. Beds. Coats hung on hooks. Shoes lined up neatly, almost like they had agreed on their own system. When space is tight, order becomes polite. Families often stayed together when possible. Children usually took the upper bunks, climbing up with energy that adults pretended not to envy. Parents slept below, close enough to reach out in the dark if needed. Single travellers shared rooms with strangers. At first, that felt awkward. Then it felt normal. You learn a lot about a person by how they sleep, who snores, who talks quietly, who wakes up early. No one complained much. Complaining wasted energy. The air was warm, sometimes too warm. With so many people close together, heat built up quickly. Coats came off, sleeves rolled up. Windows were small or placed high, letting in only a hint of the outside world. Still, it was better than many expected. The floors were clean and easy to walk on, not polished but solid. You could walk barefoot without fear, though most kept shoes on out of habit. Old habits are stubborn things. Corridors outside the rooms connected everything like narrow rivers. They were always busy during the day, quieter at night. People learned the rhythm fast, when to ove, when to wait, when to step aside. Sounds travelled easily. A cough, a laugh, a child crying briefly before being comforted. Nothing stayed private for long, but nothing lingered either. Life moved on quickly here. Some passengers decorated their small area in quiet ways. A photo tucked near the bed, a scarf hung on a hook, a book placed carefully where it could be reached easily. These small ouches mattered. They turned space into something personal. Others did nothing at all. They preferred not to settle too deeply. For them, this was temporary. A pause between lives. Unpacking too much felt risky, like tempting fate. Sleeping arrangements were practical, not comfortable in a luxurious sense. But comfort is relative, compared to crowded houses, shared rooms and hard floors left behind. This felt acceptable, even kind. Bathrooms were shared, plain, functional. People waited their turn without much fuss. Water ran cold or warm depending on timing and luck. Complaints were rare. Expectations were already low. Cleanliness mattered more here than beauty. People noticed when things were kept orderly. They respected it. When many depend on the same space, respect becomes survival. Children adapted quickly. They treated bunks like forts, corridors like racetracks, until reminded gently that ships have rules even for fun. Their laughter filled spaces adults had already learned to keep quiet. Adults watched them with mixed feelings. Joy, worry, hope, fear. Children made the journey feel lighter and heavier at the same time. At night, the rooms changed, lamps dimmed, voices low. Arid, bodies settled. The ship's hum became more noticeable, like a shared lullaby. Some found it comforting, others needed time to trust it. Beds creaked softly as people turned. Blankets rustled. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else counted breaths until sleep arrived. The lack of luxury did not bother most. What mattered was safety, warmth, the sense that the ship was holding them, carrying. them steadily through the dark. People talked quietly before sleeping, about work, about weather, about food they missed, about food they hoped to eat again. Conversations drifted, slowed and faded. No one spoke loudly about fear. Fear did not need words. It sat quietly, managed carefully, like a fragile thing best not disturbed. The living spaces did not erase class differences, but they soften. Them. Down here, everyone lived simply. Everyone shared limits. There was comfort in that equality. Some passengers lay awake longer than others, staring up at metal ceilings, thinking about distance, about time, about what it means to be between places. The ship did not answer those questions. It did not need to. It provided what it promised. Space, shelter, movement, in third-class living spac. Life was stripped down to basics. Sleep, wake, eat, talk, rest, repeat. There was no room for pretending, and strangely, that made it easier to breathe. People did not expect joy here, but they found moments of calm, and sometimes calm was better. As the night deepened, the room settled into stillness. Bodies rested, thoughts slowed. The ship moved on, steady and patient. These spaces were OT built to be remembered. But for those inside them, they held something important, a place to pause, to gather strength, to exist without needing to explain themselves. And for now, that was enough. Food in third class was not exciting, but it was dependable. And for many passengers, that alone felt like a gift. Meals arrived on time, every day, without bargaining, without worry. You did not have. To wonder if there would be enough. You just had to show up. That mattered more than taste. The dining area was large and plain, filled with long tables and benches, no tablecloths, no fancy cutlery, just solid wood and practical plates. People sat close, sometimes shoulder to shoulder, and made room without being asked. Shared space had its own quiet rules. Meals followed a schedule, bells rang, and people moved, not rushed but alert. Missing a meal was not a disaster, but no one wanted to test that. When food is simple, timing becomes important. Breakfast was usually the lightest: bread, butter, sometimes porridge, coffee or tea that leaned more toward warm water than strong flavour. Still, it did its job. It woke people up. It filled the stomach just enough to start the day. Some a day. Humour to it. Strong enough to wake the dead, someone joked once, holding up a cup. Another replied, then we're lucky because we're not there yet. Small laughs followed, the kind that stayed close to the table. Lunch was heartier. Soup, meat when available, potatoes, bread again. Bread was always there, reliable, quiet. No one complained about bread. Bread meant energy. Bread meant survival. Dinner was the most satisfying, not because it was fancy, but because it marked the end of the day. Warm food after long hours of waiting, walking, and thinking always tasted better. Even simple stew felt rich when eaten slowly. Water was available, though people treated it carefully. You did not waste water. Old habits followed you across the ocean. Cups were filled, not overflowed. Children were reminded not to play with it. Adults nodded in agreement without being told. Clean drinking water mattered. Many had come from places where it could be trusted. Here, it was clear and safe. That built quiet confidence in the ship. People ate at different speeds. Some finished quickly, already thinking about the next task. Others took their time, stretching the moment. Food was one of the few breaks in the day that belonged fully to them. Conversation at meals was relaxed, not deep, not serious. Weather, children, the ship, someone always calm. Mented on how big it was, even days into the journey. Size did not stop being impressive. Languages mixed freely. A sentence might start in one language and end in another. Meaning survived just fine. Hunger is multilingual. Daily routine formed naturally. Wake up, wash if possible, eat, walk, sit, talk, rest, eat again, sleep. The ship decided the rhythm, and most followed without resistance. The was comfort in routine. When everything else in life felt uncertain, knowing when the next meal would come brought peace. People planned their days around it. Not rigid plans, gentle ones. Mornings were quieter, bodies stiff from sleep, minds slow to catch up. People moved carefully, avoiding bumping into each other. Voices stayed low. No one wanted to start the day annoyed. As the day went on, energy returned. Children grew louder. Adults grew more talkative. Corridors filled with movement. People walked not because they needed to go somewhere, but because standing still too long made thoughts heavier. Some passengers cleaned, not because they were asked, but because clean space felt better. Beds were straightened, shoes aligned, small areas were kept neat. Order helped the mind rest. Thurs spent time writing letters they could not yet send. Words were chosen slowly, crossed out, rewritten. It was easier to write about the future than the past. Water stations became small meeting points. People waited their turn, exchanged nods, shared comments about the temperature or the taste. These tiny interactions added up. They reminded everyone they were not alone. Children learned the routine fastest. They knew when food came, when adults were busy, when they could play without getting in trouble. Their days were lighter, even when space was limited. Parents watched carefully. Routine helped children feel safe. Predictable meals, predictable sleep, predictable movement. It mattered more than comfort. Some passengers missed familiar foods deeply. Bread tasted different, soup lacked spices. Coffee was weak. They talked about meals they remembered with surprising detail. Recipes passed along tables like stories. Food was memory as much as nourishment. No one went hungry, and that alone changed moods. People were patient. Disagreements were rare. When stomachs are full, tempers rest easier. The ship's staff moved efficiently, rarely noticed unless something was missing. Tes were collected, tables wiped. The system worked. It did not need praise. It just needed to continue. Afternoons stretched long. Without work, time felt strange. People filled it by talking, walking, or simply sitting and watching others. Watching became a quiet skill. You learned faces, you learned habits. Some passengers rested often. Travel before the ship had already drained them. Sleep easily during the day, short and light. Others avoided naps, afraid they would miss something important. Evenings felt calmer. Meals slowed things down. People lingered longer at tables. Conversations softened. The ship seemed to breathe deeper. After dinner, some returned straight to their bunks. Others stayed up, talking quietly, sharing jokes or listening. There was always someone telling a story. Stories passed time better than clocks. Water was drunk slowly at night. Too much meant waking up too often. People learned these things quickly. Before sleep, routines repeated. Washing faces, folding clothes, placing shoes where they could be found in the dark. Small habits gave control in a place where much was out of your hands. Beds filled one by one. Lights dimmed, voices faded. The hips hum became the loudest sound again. Food, water, routine. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just the basics, handled well. For third-class passengers, this was enough. Regular meals, safe water, a steady rhythm. It was not luxury, but it was stability. And stability, after years of uncertainty, felt almost like kindness. Health was taken seriously on the ship, not in a warm, caring way, but a careful, watchful way, the kind that came from rules written long before the journey began, rules that did not bend easily. For third-class passengers, health was not just personal, it was official. Cleanliness mattered. Not because it looked nice, but because it protected everyone. People washed when they could, faces in the morning, hands before meals. Children were reminded again and again, sometimes gently, sometimes with tired patience. Water for washing was available, though not unlimited. You learned to use just enough, a quick splash, a shared towel, a habit formed fast. No one wasted what others might need. Bathing was simple and scheduled. No long, relaxing washes, just practical cleaning. Soap was plain. The smell was sharp but familiar. It meant fresh, and fresh meant safe. People wore the same clothes often. They brushed them off, aired them when possible. Clean clothes were not about fashion. They were about health. Lice, sickness, and skin problems were things people feared quietly. Old experiences followed them onto the ship. Many had lived in crowded homes. They already knew how illness could spread. That knowledge shaped behavior more than rules ever could. ICAL checks were part of life in third class. Doctors and staff moved through spaces with calm authority. They watched faces, listened to coughs, asked questions that sounded simple but carried weight. Do you feel well? Any pain? Any fever? People answered carefully, honestly but carefully. A wrong answer could mean separation, observation, waiting. No one wanted waiting. Children were cared closely. Their eyes, their skin, their breathing. Parents watched with tight expressions, smiling when told everything looked fine. Relief came fast and left slowly. If someone looked unwell, attention followed, not panic, just focus. A staff member might ask them to rest more, to stay put, to be watched. This was not punishment, it was prevention. Still, it did not feel kind. Quarantine rules hovered in the background of daily life. Not always spoken, but always understood. Illness could stop everything. Entry to a new country depended on health. Everyone knew stories of people turned away after long journeys. That fear stayed close. Third-class passengers were separated from other classes partly for this reason. Health officials wanted clear lines, clear control. It was easier to money. Tour groups kept together. Easier did not mean nicer. People accepted it because arguing changed nothing. Shared spaces were cleaned regularly, floors wiped, tables cleared, air circulated as much as possible. The ship felt controlled, like someone was always keeping watch. Some found that reassuring. Others found it uncomfortable. Coughs drew attention. Sneezes earned looks. A simple cold could mar. A person feels suddenly visible in the worst way. People learned to turn away, cover mouths, apologize even when there was no need. Apologies were common. For noise, for space, for being noticed. Bathrooms were kept orderly, lines formed without complaint. People waited their turn patiently. Clean hands mattered. Everyone understood that children were hardest to manage. They touched everything, ran everywhere. Parents stayed alert, wiping hands, fixing clothes, reminding them not to put things in their mouths. Exhausting work, but necessary. Some parents carried small cloths just for cleaning faces and hands. They used them often. These small acts felt like control in a situation where control was limited. Staff members enforced rules calmly. No shouting, no threats, just firm instructio. This way. Please wait, not here. People listened. Authority was clear, and resistance felt useless. Ill passengers were not shamed, but they were watched. That attention felt heavy. No one wanted to be the reason others were delayed or questioned. Responsibility spread across everyone. Sleep mattered for health too. People tried to rest when they could. Overwork and worry made the body weaker. Parents encouraged children to nap. Adults reminded each other to slow down. Food helped. Warm meals supported strength. Even simple soup felt important when illness was a fear. People ate carefully, finishing what they took, not wasting what the body needed. Faith played a role here as well. Quiet prayers for health were common. Not dramatic, just steady. Hands folded briefly, eyes closed for a moment. Hope whispered instead of ken. Some wore small charms or medals, believed to protect against sickness. Others trusted routine and cleanliness more. Both felt valid. The ship's doctors were respected but distant. They were there to observe, not to comfort. That distance made sense, but it also made people cautious. No one wanted to draw attention. Health checks continued quietly. A glance here, a question there. Most passed, without issue. Life went on. Despite the rules, fear did not rule everything. People laughed, children played, conversations flowed. Health concerns stayed in the background like a low sound you learned to ignore unless it changed. That balance mattered. Too much worry would exhaust everyone. Too little would risk everything. Most found a middle ground without talking about it. Hygiene became rue. Tine, wash, wipe, repeat. No drama, just habit. Habits are powerful. They make difficult things manageable. At night, as people settled into beds, coughing seemed louder. Every sound travelled further in quiet spaces. People held breaths, listening. Silence returned. Relief followed. Morning brought another round of checks, another day of careful living. Bodies adjusted, minds adapted. What felt ricked at first became normal. Third-class passengers did not complain much about health rules. They had lived under worse systems. At least here, rules had a purpose that made sense. Clean spaces, healthy bodies, safe passage. These were not comforts, but they were protections. And protection, on a long journey with everything at stake, mattered deeply, so people followed the rules, washed their NDES, watched their children, answered questions carefully. They did not see it as obedience, they saw it as cooperation. Everyone wanted the same thing, to arrive healthy. Children experienced the ship differently. Where adults saw rules, worries, and responsibility, children saw movement, sound, and possibility. To them, Titanic was not a symbol or a promise. It was a place where everything felt new. They woke up early, often before their parents wanted them to. The ship was already awake, and children could sense it. Footsteps in the corridors, voices passing by, the low hum beneath the floor that felt like a giant purring. For a child, that sound was comforting. Lower decks became their small world. Narrow hallways turned into long adventures, corners became hiding spots, echoes became toys. A laugh shouted once would bounce back twice, and that alone was worth repeating until an adult cleared their throat. Children ran until told not to. Then they walked, slowly. For about 10 seconds, parents kept watch the best they could. Eyes followed small figures moving between bunks and benches. Worry never fully rested, but neither did affection. Children carried hope more lightly than adults, and that made them precious. Most children wore clothes that had already lived a full life, sleeves rolled up, knees patched, shoes a little too big, bought with the future in mind. Growth was expected, space was allowed for it. They asked many questions. Is the ship bigger than our town? Are there fish under us right now? Do the walls ever end? Parents answered what they could. When? They could not. They made something up that sounded calm. Children accepted these answers easily. They trusted tone more than facts. Meals were exciting for children, not because the food was special, but because eating together always is. Long tables meant new faces, new chances to smile, bread torn into pieces shared without thinking. Some children ate quickly, eager to leave the table. Others ate slowly, distracted by everything around them. Parents reminded them gently, or not so gently, depending on the day. Water was a game to be careful with. Cups were held tightly. Spills happened anyway. Children apologized quickly, copying the adults around them. Learning manners through observation more than instruction. Play happened wherever it could. A ball made of cloth, a string, a song, Mez were invented and forgotten just as fast. When space is limited, imagination grows legs. Children from different countries played together without effort. They did not care about accents. Words were optional. A smile meant the same thing everywhere. Adults watched these small friendships form and felt something loosen inside them. If children could adapt so easily, maybe adults could too. Not. All moments were light. Some children sensed the tension in their parents. They noticed the quiet conversations, the long stares, the way adults paused before answering certain questions. Children did not always understand, but they felt it. At night, some children slept deeply, others struggled. New sounds, new smells, new beds that moved when the ship moved. Parents lay close, offering warmth and familiar breathing. A hand held in the dark could quiet many fears. Mothers often carried the weight of routine, washing faces, fixing clothes, keeping track of socks that seemed to disappear without reason. Children tested patience daily, and patience was given daily, though sometimes thin. Fathers played when they could, lifted children up, let them climb, laughed louder than usual. Play was easier than worry, even if only for a few minutes. Some children were old enough to help. They carried small items, watched younger siblings, listened carefully when spoken to. Responsibility arrived early for them, but they wore it with quiet pride. Younger children knew less but felt more. They sensed when parents were tired, when voices softened too much, when smiles lasted a little longer than needed. Comfort came in small forms. A song hummed quietly, a story told again and again. Familiar words mattered more than originality. The ship itself fascinated them. Doors that opened into long spaces, stairs that seemed to go on forever, sounds that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some children pressed their ears to the walls, listening. They did not know what they were listening for. They just liked knowing something was there. Adults sometimes worried children would get lost. The ship was large, and lower decks twisted in ways that confused even grown people. But children remembered paths by instinct. Left turn, right turn, the place where the light flickered, the corner that smelled like soap. They always found their way back. Illness was watched closely with children. A cough earned attention. A warm forehead caused concern. Parents stayed alert, wiping noses, checking breaths, staying calm on the outside even when worry climbed fast inside. Children sensed this too. Some became quieter, trying not to cause trouble. Others acted out more, reacting to tension they could not name. Staff members noticed children. Some smiled at them. Some nodded, some kept distance. Children remembered the kind ones and forgot the rest. Children had less patience for waiting. Long days tested them. Parents improvised. Stories stretched longer. Games repeated. Promises made about later and soon. Later and soon were flexible words. Despite limits, children found joy easily. A shared laugh, a funny walk, a song started and finished badly. Joy did not need space, it needed PE. A mission. Adults allowed it because it reminded them of something important. Life was still happening, even here, even now. At bedtime, children slowed. Energy faded suddenly like a switch turned off. Bodies curled, eyes closed mid-thought. Parents adjusted blankets and watched for a moment longer than necessary. In sleep, children looked peaceful, free from plans and fear, just breathing, steady. And sure, for parents, this was both comfort and weight. Children trusted them completely. That trust sat heavy on tired shoulders. Children did not think about class. They did not care about tickets or rules or futures shaped by papers. They lived in moments. The now was enough. That innocence filled lower decks with something rare, lightness. Even in crowded spaces, even under rules and routine, children made room for wonder. They reminded everyone else how to do the same. even if only briefly. And as the ship carried them onward, children of the lower decks dreamed easily. Their dreams were not about destinations or work or survival. They dreamed about games that never ended, about halls that went on forever, about tomorrow being another day to explore. For them, that was more than a noog. Life on the lower decks was not all rules, work and routine. It had its own rhythm, softer than the engines, but just as steady. Music floated through the corridors, faith whispered in quiet corners, and little sparks of joy appeared in ways big and small. Passengers carried songs with them, not the fancy music played in the upper decks. These were folk tunes, lullabies, songs from home. Sumty, Mez, a woman hummed a tune while folding clothes. A man tapped out a rhythm on the table. Children joined in, their voices high and uneven, yet perfectly in tune with the moment. Music did more than fill the air. It comforted. It reminded people of lands they had left behind, of family gatherings, festivals, quiet nights in small homes. Each note carried memory. Each word carried hope. Even when the songs were sung softly, barely audible over footsteps and the hum of the ship, they travelled farther than anyone expected. Faith lived quietly here, not the kind that demanded attention or ceremonies. Simple gestures, a hand crossed over a chest, fingers clasped tightly while eyes closed, a whispered prayer before sleep, a soft thanks before eating bread or taking a sip of water. Faith was a way to make sense of the journey. It was not about miracles promised. It was about courage, endurance, and hope. Every prayer was a small act of strength. It reminded passengers that even when the ocean seemed endless, they were not entirely alone. Small joys appeared in every corner. A child discovering a new echo in the hallway, a shared laugh over a spilled cup of tea, a stranger handing over a pie. CE of bread or a coat that fit better than the one they had. Humour, quiet and unpretentious, thrived. Sometimes people laughed at the ship itself. "She creaks like my father's old chair," one joked. "At least the chair doesn't float across an ocean." Someone else replied. Simple exchanges like this made long days easier. Laughter was a bond, a tiny rebellion against fear, fatigue and uncertainty. Celebrations were rare but meaningful, birthdays quietly marked, small religious holidays acknowledged with a song or a prayer, letters read aloud, good news shared in whispers. Each event made the deck feel more like a community, a shared world where strangers could belong to each other, if only for a night. Even chores carried moments of satisfaction. Folding clean clothes, arranging shoes, sweeping a corner of the room, tasks that might feel ordinary elsewhere became gentle routines that reminded passengers that life continued, and that they mattered. For the children, joy was easier to find. A string tied to a makeshift toy, a race-down tea, a corridor, a song that made the adults shake their heads and smile. Their happiness was contagious. Adults often laughed more at their antics than at anything else. It reminded everyone that even in limited space, life could be bright, faith, music and small joys intertwined. A lullaby hummed over a bedtime prayer, a quiet joke shared during a meal, a child dancing to the beat of a story being told. Life on the lower decks was about survival, yes, but it was also about remembering that happiness could exist even in the smallest forms. The third-class passengers carried these comforts with them like treasure. They did not need gold or silk. They needed laughter, hope, and the reassurance that tomorrow could be a little lighter than today. And when the night deepened, when the lights dim, when the gentle hum of the ship filled every corner, those songs, prayers, and quiet joys lingered. They travelled with each person to their bunks, wrapped around them like invisible blankets, carrying warmth, courage, and a little spark of home across the wide, dark ocean. On Titanic, class was everywhere, even when it was not spoken. The divisions were not always obvious, but they existed in ways that shaped life on the ship. Third-class passengers felt them every day, even if they never said the words out loud. The upper decks sparkled with luxury. Polished wood, soft carpets, chandeliers, music that floated perfectly from room to room. Staff moved politely, waiting for instructions. Every corner whispered, "This is special. This is yours if you can afford it." Down in third class. The spaces were simpler, smaller, practical. Strong bunks, shared tables, narrow corridors. Nothing here pretended to be anything more than it was. That was fine. They didn't need silver spoons or orchestras. But the difference was always there. You could see it if you looked. Even the way people moved carried signals. Staff responded differently depending on which deck they were on. Questions, W. Air answered more patiently upstairs. Downstairs, answers were brisk, efficient, sometimes curt. There was no malice, just rules, expectations, lines that were rarely crossed. Meals were another visible barrier. First-class passengers dined in grand halls with multiple courses and fine china. Third class had plain tables and simple dishes, though plenty to eat. Both groups were fed, but the experience could not have been more different. Taste, space, attention, these were all invisible markers of status. Access to the outdoors also separated people. Upper decks had wide promenades, chairs for lounging, and unobstructed views of the ocean. Third-class passengers could go outside, but space was limited. Their views were blocked by railings or lifeboats. I could feel the wind, see the horizon, but always through a frame that reminded them they were somewhere else. Even daily routines carried barriers. Upper-class passengers had more freedom to choose when to wake, eat, or exercise. Third class followed schedules dictated by the ship, stricter and less flexible. Comfort and choice were privileges. Downstairs you accepted what you could get. Childer. In noticed too. They saw the difference in play spaces. They saw which decks had room to run and which had corners for hiding. They saw who laughed freely and who moved carefully, mindful of etiquette. Class shapes perception even when understanding is incomplete. Yet barriers were not just physical, they were social. Conversations rarely crossed the lines. A third-class passenger might deliver a message or a note to the upper decks, but casual chats were rare. Smiles exchanged across corridors were polite, but strangers from another class rarely became familiar. These boundaries were reinforced by expectation. Everyone knew their place, and it was safest to stay there. Some passengers accepted this quietly, others felt it sharply, like a cold breeze on an otherwise warm day. Irony played a role, too. Some of the richest passengers relied on staff for every small need. Some third-class passengers were managing entire households in their minds, food, clothing, children, travel plans, while being moved by others with ease. Skill and resilience did not always match wealth, but social barriers ignored that. Still, life downstairs was rich in ways the upper decks could not understand. Ed space built community. Challenges created creativity. Humor and stories thrived. People learned to rely on each other. That kind of connection existed only where necessity demanded it. Even within third class, invisible lines existed. Nationality, language, age, and gender created micro-groups. Irish passengers stuck together. Italian families shared tables. Children played in clusters. But the sea lines were flexible, adaptable. Unlike the rigid, formal barriers that separated classes, the invisible barriers were reinforced in small ways: the staff's tone, the location of a corridor, the size of a dining hall, even the sound of laughter echoing differently from deck to deck. Every subtle detail reminded passengers where they belonged, and yet the boundaries did not stop humanity. People crossed them in small ways, a shared joke, a helpful hand, a song that drifted upward from a lower deck and was heard above. Moments like these reminded everyone that barriers were not walls. They were invisible lines drawn in the air, but invisible lines can still feel heavy. They shape behavior, expectations, and self-perception. Downstairs, passengers adapted. They did not ignore the barriers. The EY respected them. Survival and comfort depended on knowing the limits, but life still found a way to thrive within them. By the end of the day, these barriers felt both permanent and strangely irrelevant. You saw them, you felt them, yet life carried on. Laughter, meals, songs, and sleep ignored social divisions. The invisible barriers existed, but they did not define the worth of anyone below deck. They simply reminded everyone where society expected them to stand, while life quietly moved around the edges, making room for courage, joy, and small triumphs even in limited spaces. The night of April 14th, 1912 began quietly, almost like any other on the lower decks. Third-class passengers had eaten, washed, and settled into their bunks. Children whispered stories to each other until sleep claimed them. Parents watched briefly, then closed their eyes themselves, letting the hum of the ship become a lullaby. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, dark and calm. The stars were sharp in the clear sky. Up on the upper decks, the elite promenaded and laughed. Under the glow of lamps, below, life was simpler, quieter, but no less full of hope and expectation. No one expected the ordinary night to turn extraordinary. The ship sailed on, confident and strong, slicing through icy waters. Conversations drifted gently along the corridors. A child giggled at a whispered joke. Someone hummed a song from home. A mother tucked a blanket tighter around a sleeping child. The hum of engines and the occasional clink of metal created a background rhythm that felt reassuring. Suddenly, the sound of a jolt cut through that rhythm. Not a roar, not a crash at first, just a subtle vibration like the ship had shifted slightly, testing its weight against the ocean. Many passengers barely noticed. Some woke and blinked at the ceiling, unsure if it had been their imag. In the third-class cabins, whispers spread. Did you feel that? It's nothing. Just the ship settling. People tried to return to sleep, convincing themselves it was normal. After all, a ship that big groaned occasionally. It was expected. It was safe. But the vibrations returned, harder this time. A shudder ran along the decks, subtle yet unmistakable. The hum of the engines stuttered. Briefly, footsteps quickened. Mothers clutched children. Fathers rose from bunks trying to appear calm. Even seasoned travellers felt a flicker of unease. Rumours travelled fast. Something hit the ship? A few voices questioned in low tones. The staff moved efficiently, reassuring when they could, but the words were careful, measured. Panic had no place yet. Observation and order were the first E. Passengers left their bunks reluctantly. Corridors, usually quiet, filled with cautious footsteps. Children were held tightly, their eyes wide. Families huddled together, instinctively seeking safety in numbers. Conversations were hushed. Jokes, once so natural, were replaced by quiet speculation. Some older passengers sensed something wrong immediately. Not the full story, but the ocean is unforgiving, and sailors' intuition can read vibrations, temperatures, and subtle shifts. Others remain skeptical, unwilling to believe that their massive ship, the greatest ever built, could be in danger. Below deck, communication was limited. There were no announcements, yet only the faint murmur of staff moving through corridors, checking rooms, giving small nods. Their faces were calm, but betrayed awareness. Third-class passengers trusted the staff, but also felt the weight of uncertainty. Minutes passed, stretching longer than usual. People listened to the engines, to the ship, to each other. The air felt colder, heavier. The vast quiet of the Atlantic pressed in. Outside, the water lapped gently, unaware of the human lives above it. For some passengers, humour remained. A man were spared to a friend. Maybe the ship is just stretching. Children laughed softly at the idea, sensing relief in the attempt at normalcy. Adults smiled faintly, though tension lingered. Humour, even small, helped keep fear at bay. Faith, too, became a quiet refuge. Prayers, whispered and private, multiplied, hands clasped, eyes closed. People leaned on invisible support, hoping the night would pass. As any other. A belief in something larger than themselves offered steadiness amidst the uncertainty. And then the first clear orders came. The staff, calm but firm, began guiding passengers. Instructions were precise. Move here, wait there. Families kept together, no running, safety first. Fear was managed with control. Passengers descended and ascended stairways carefully, following directions, clutching belongings, children, and each other. Some held tickets tightly, as if paper could hold them safe. Others clutched small keepsakes from home, reminding themselves of why they had come so far. The night stretched on. Sounds of water, engines, and the occasional command filled the lower decks. Life that had been simple now required alertness. Survival, even in thought, replaced routine. Foe. The third-class passengers. The night of April 14 was the first time hope, fear, faith, and humour collided in a single moment. Each person processed it differently. Some whispered reassurances. Some silently counted breaths. Some hummed songs. Children, sensing the tension, clung to parents. Their laughter faded into quiet wonder. It was not yet disaster. It was not yet panic. It was the night tea. His ship reminded everyone below deck that the world outside their bunks was unpredictable, and that even the greatest ship in the world could face the vast, unforgiving ocean. In the darkness, passengers held on to what they knew, each other, the hum of the ship, and the fragile trust that life could continue. And for now, that fragile trust carried them through the first hours of a night that wool. Be remembered forever. It happened quietly at first. Not the shattering crash people imagine in movies, not a roar that shakes walls and wakes every soul. Just a subtle, strange vibration running through the hull, a shiver that made the decks tremble underfoot. For passengers in third class, sleeping or awake, it was the first hint that something was wrong. Some felt it as a mere shift beneath tea, air bunks. Others thought it might be their imagination. Ships do creak after all, and Titanic, the greatest ship ever built, was strong, unthinkably strong. But when the vibration ran again, longer this time, the murmurs began. "Did you feel that?" someone whispered. A mother clutched her child. A father rose from his bunk, eyes narrowing. In the dim light of the lower decks, the hum of the engi. Ness seemed to falter for a brief moment, like the ship had paused, unsure of itself. The staff moved quickly but silently. They understood before anyone else did. They knew the sound of trouble when they heard it. A few orders were whispered through corridors. Calm, deliberate movements replaced the usual shuffle of footsteps. Panic had not yet arrived, but tension thickened in the air. Passengers noticed subtle changes immediately. The hum of the engines felt different. The floor beneath them vibrated strangely, almost like a heartbeat, irregular and uncertain. The walls that had seemed solid and reliable now carried a hint of warning. People instinctively huddled closer to family, as though proximity could shield them from the unseen danger outside. Children stirred. Some cried softly, "Say," sensing worry they could not name. Mothers whispered reassurances that sounded fragile even to themselves. Fathers tried to appear calm, but in their eyes was the same flicker of doubt shared by everyone below deck. Above them the sound was faintly sharper, metal scraping against ice. Titanic had met something it could not ignore. A slab of the North Atlantic, solid and cold, scraping along the mass. Ive hull. Below decks the sound travelled oddly, distant yet vibrating through the bones. Passengers instinctively pressed their hands against bunks or walls, as if grounding themselves might help. For some, it felt unreal. How could the greatest ship in the world strike something? A luxury liner proclaimed unsinkable, strong and proud, had touched danger in the dark. The irony was bitter. Even I. Unspoken. People exchanged nervous glances, realizing that even the strongest structures were not invincible. The first reactions were practical. Parents checked children. Belongings were clutched tightly. Some whispered prayers. Some held onto tickets, photographs, or letters, anything that represented hope and home. Every item, no matter how small, felt suddenly vital. Staff moved efficiently. Their voices were calm, issuing instructions that demanded attention without raising alarm. Remain calm, stay together, wait for directions. Those words carried weight. Obedience felt safer than curiosity. Every step, every decision now mattered more than ever. Passengers leaned into routines they had learned over the journey. The daily rhythm of meals, washings, and small chores became a grounding force. Even amidst uncertainty, habits offered comfort. A mother straightened blankets. A father arranged shoes. Small acts of order helped manage a growing sense of fear. In that moment, hope and tension coexisted. No one knew the full scale of danger yet, but instinct warned the ship was no longer simply a carrier of dreams and stories. It was a vessel facing the harsh reality of the ocean it sailed upon. The hum of the engines returned gradually, but the knowledge remained. Titanic had struck ice. Something massive, cold and immovable had scratched her side, sending vibrations down into the lowest decks, touching every life below. Passengers could not see the damage. They could not hear the roar of the sea outside, only the faint echo and the tremor beneath their feet. Yet the moment alone changed everything. It shifted the quiet confidence of third class into awareness. That awareness was heavy. It made hearts beat faster, eyes watch more closely, and hands hold children tighter. The ship, once an unquestioned safe space, had reminded them of its limits, and in the dark, crowded corridors of the lower decks, third-class passengers waited. Not for rescue, not for fear end. Just waited, holding on to each other, holding on to small comforts, and holding on to the fragile belief that the world above deck and below could somehow carry them safely through the night. The iceberg had struck. The night had changed, and nothing would ever feel ordinary again. After the iceberg struck, confusion rippled quietly at first, then faster as reality sank in. For third-class PA, Sengers, the first problem wasn't the cold or the water, it was the gates, locked gates. Steel barriers meant to separate classes suddenly became obstacles they hadn't imagined could matter. In ordinary times, these gates ensured order, kept decks organized, helped the crew manage crowds. But now, they felt like walls trapping people in the wrong place at the wrong time. Corridors that once felt like paths became mazes. Doors that usually opened easily were locked. Some had keys, some didn't. Panic didn't scream yet. It simmered quietly, fueled by frustration and uncertainty. Families paused, trying to figure out the right way forward. Parents lifted children over small barriers. Others tried doors, turning knobs, pulling, pushing. Every attempt wasted precious time. Minutes stretched into longer, heavier minutes. Small efforts felt monumental. Children were confused and scared. They had trusted adults to guide them. Now, even adults were unsure. Voices echoed through narrow corridors. Some whispered instructions. Some shouted softly. Everyone's heartbeat seemed louder than the usual hum of the ship. Passengers had to navigate quickly, but speed was limited. Crowded hallways slowed. Bunks and luggage blocked movement. Narrow stairwells created bottlenecks. Simple actions became exercises in patience and problem-solving under pressure. Time felt strange. It seemed to slow, then stretch. Each second was heavier than the last. Adults calculated routes in their heads, remembering staircases, hallways, and exits they had passed during the day. Some routes were blocked by CRE, managing chaos above. Every step was cautious. Every decision carried weight. Rumors spread quietly among the passengers. Some believed they were going the wrong way. Others feared missing lifeboats. Anxiety grew, but voices remained low. In tight spaces, shouting could only make matters worse. Calm, even if forced, became survival. Staff appeared occasionally, opening doors, giving directions, guiding people. But the process was slow. Orders had to be repeated. Confusion made coordination difficult. Many passengers had never faced anything like this, and even trained crew could only move so fast. Families stayed together as best they could. Parents clutched children, adults helped each other, strangers lent hands over gates, through narrow spaces. Cooperation became instinctive, shared. Survival replaced social divisions, at least temporarily. The locked gates created a new awareness of vulnerability. It wasn't the icy ocean that terrified first. It was the realization that physical barriers could slow them, even trap them, while danger approached. People understood, perhaps for the first time, that safety depended not just on skill or courage, but on timing and access. Many passengers remembered small lessons from the voyage. Routes memorized for convenience now mattered for survival. Details that seemed trivial, handholds, corners, widths of corridors, suddenly took on monumental importance. Every piece of knowledge, no matter how minor, became a tool against uncertainty. Time was both enemy and teacher. Minutes lost navigating locked gates seemed endless. Yet these minutes also revealed human character. Some people panicked, some froze, others acted with quiet decisiveness, guiding families and strangers alike. Cooperation arose naturally, as if the crisis had written new rules. Children adapted fastest. Small enough to slip through gaps, they ran ahead, guided by adults when necessary. Their nimbleness became an unexpected advantage. Parents learned quickly. Hold little ones close. Let them lead when needed, and trust instincts. By the time passengers navigated through the locked gates, the ship had already changed. The hum of engines was different. The corridors felt colder. Movement was slower, heavier. The sense of time being lost, moments that could not be regained, hung in the air like mist. Yet amidst the fear and confusion, small acts of courage and kindness shone. Strangers helped each other over obstacles. Parents reassured children. Voices whispered encouragement instead of panic. Every small effort mattered. Locked gates were more than metal. They were symbols of limits. Limits imposed by class, by architecture, by circumstance. And in that moment, those limits became literal obstacles. Third-class passengers experienced them fully. Pain. Fully, but also learned the value of cooperation, quick thinking, and presence of mind. Lost time had a weight, but it also taught clarity. In chaos, small actions counted. Patience, careful observation, and teamwork could make the difference between confusion and survival. By the time the corridors emptied and families regrouped, the locked gates had changed everything. People moved more deliberate. They understood that time could no longer be taken for granted. Every second mattered, and every choice had consequences. The night continued darker and colder, but third-class passengers pressed forward. Hindered by barriers, slowed by lost time, they adapted. And in that adaptation, a quiet resilience began to emerge. A resilience that would be tested more than anyone could imagine. After navigating locked gates and twisted corridors, the next challenge loomed, reaching the upper decks. For third-class passengers, it was more than a physical climb. It was a test of endurance, courage, and sheer will. The staircases were narrow and steep, built for convenience, not panic. People carried children, luggage, blankets, small possessions, all while trying not to trip, slip, or get stuck in. The bottleneck. Every step upward felt heavier than the last, as if the ship itself resisted their ascent. Parents lifted children over railings. Strangers lent hands to each other, forming impromptu chains. Adults swapped places, taking turns carrying those too small or too tired to continue. Cooperation became instinct. Trust became necessity. The corridors were crowded. Voices rose in soft urge. NCY, overlapping directions from staff. Some passengers shouted instructions. Others whispered reassurance. Fear was present, but controlled. Chaos could have erupted, but humans are resilient when survival demands it. Children clung tightly to their parents. Some whined, some cried, some tried to run ahead. Adults managed each child differently. Some held them close, some let them grasp hands of saint. Rangers for support. Movement slowed and quickened unpredictably. Fatigue was everywhere. Weeks of travel, the stress of life below deck, and now the sudden urgency of the moment weighed on every body. Every step required effort, every breath was measured. Sweat dampened clothes, hair stuck to foreheads, muscles ached, but no one stopped. Stopping could mean getting lost, delayed, or worse. The EP groaned and creaked under strain. Metal shifted. Water sloshed far below. The low hum of engines seemed distant now, almost swallowed by the noise of movement and the tension of survival. Passengers felt the ship as a living entity, carrying them but also challenging them, reminding them of limits. Staff were everywhere, directing traffic, opening doors, ensuring order where panic might have Ken over. Their calm authority was crucial. A simple "this way" or "slow down" became a lifeline. People listened because they had no choice, but also because it made sense. Safety depended on structure. Some passengers paused to rest, leaning against walls, stair rails, anything solid. Others pushed forward relentlessly. The physical struggle mirrored the mental one, determination battling fear, hope battling exhaustion. Each person calculated their own pace, balancing speed. With caution. In the crush of bodies, strangers became allies. A hand reached down to lift someone over a step. A shoulder supported a child too tired to climb. Eyes met briefly, communicating a shared understanding: we move together or not at all. Social class lines blurred, if only temporarily, under the weight of urgency. Children adapted remarkably fast. Their smaller frames allowed them to slip through gaps. Their energy, though sometimes erratic, helped adults maintain pace. Parents whispered encouragement, sang softly, or hummed songs to keep spirits from collapsing. Laughter appeared briefly, almost as a shield against panic. The higher they climbed, the colder it became. Air from the upper decks pushed downward, sharper and biting. Sweat on skin cooled instantly. Children shiver. Adults clutched them tighter. Blankets were wrapped more securely. Every exposed hand and face felt the chill of the night. Doors and corridors above third class were no longer familiar. These were spaces designed for the first and second class passengers. Wider halls, grander finishes, carpets instead of plain floors. For third class passengers, everything felt strange and temporary. There we were, no bunks, no familiar corners, just open space, chaos, and the faint sound of water far below. The final stretch to the upper deck was a test of will. Some adults slipped, grabbed by hands from behind. Some children were lifted over railings by the combined strength of multiple people. Every small success felt monumental. Every setback threatened despair. When the first glimpses of the open deck appeared, passengers hesitated. The night was cold. The stars reflected faintly on the ocean, now darker than ever. The vastness of the Atlantic pressed against them. The air smelled of water and metal, and yet they had made it. The struggle to reach the upper decks was not only about survival, it was about taking control in a situation where so much had already been stripped away. Every step upward. R&D was an act of defiance against fear. Every hand extended to another person was a quiet declaration of humanity. For children, the upper deck was overwhelming. Open space, wind, and unfamiliar sounds made them cling to adults even tighter, yet some marveled at the scene. Waves glinting under the moonlight, the expanse of the sky, the endless dark water. Fear and wonder mixed in equal measure. For adults, it was exhaustion mingled with relief. Relief at being out of enclosed corridors. Exhaustion from the climb and the weight of responsibility. The human spirit had been tested, and though shaken, it endured. Standing on the upper deck, third-class passengers realized the journey was far from over. The struggle had given them momentum, but now the cold, the fear, and the unknown awaited. They had overcome the first barrier, the climb itself. It was a small victory. But in that moment, every hand held, every child lifted, and every step taken upward mattered. It reminded everyone that even in the darkest nights, progress, no matter how slow or painful, was possible. The upper decks were not safety yet, but they were space. They were visibility. They were the first true glimpse of what the world outside the lower decks demanded, and the first opportunity to face it together. Reaching the upper decks was only part of the challenge. Once there, third-class passengers faced a new struggle, decisions that no one should ever have to make. Mothers, fathers, children, everyone realized that survival was not guaranteed, and that reality demanded choices that broke hearts even before. Consequences appeared. The air was cold and sharp. The night wind bit through layers of clothing carrying the salty scent of the Atlantic. Passengers clutched children tightly. Parents counted heads, ensuring no one was missing. Every small action carried weight. A child's cry could ripple through the deck like a warning. Families faced questions with no answers. Who would go first to the lifeboat? Could everyone fit? Would helping someone else put your own loved ones at risk? These thoughts arrived instantly and violently. There was no time to rationalize. Only instinct guided them. Mothers tried to protect children at all costs. Some lifted them onto benches, over railings, or into the arms of strangers willing to help. Each hand extended was an act of trust and a quiet gamble. Parents whispered encouragement, trying to calm shaking bodies while masking their own fear. Fathers made split-second decisions. Which direction to move? Which path seemed safest? Could they balance care for one child without losing sight of another? Every decision was a compromise, every choice a moral weight. Guilt came faster than relief. Adults realized early that not everyone could move together. Space was limited. Lifeboats could not hold everyone at once. Passengers had to prioritize. Who boarded first, who stayed behind, who took a chance on climbing further to find another lifeboat. No one wanted to make these choices, yet the night left them no alternative. Strangers became unexpected allies. Parents lent hands, shared blankets, or held children, while another adult maneuvered through the crush of people. Cooperation was crucial. Every gesture could mean the difference between life and death. Children sensed tension. Some cried openly, their fear raw. Others clung silently, too young to understand but old enough to feel that the air was charged with urgency. Parents soothed them the best they could, whispering songs, prayers, or simple words of reassurance. Their own voices shook, but they hid it. Impossible choices also weighed on couples. Should one parent accompany children into a lifeboat while the other remained to help others? Who would bear the responsibility if something went wrong? Decisions were made in seconds, guided by instinct, fear, and the desperate hope of survival. Passengers were not just fighting the elements. They were grappling with morality under press. Guilt, love, hope, and fear collided. Some sacrificed comfort to make space for others. Some stayed behind so others could live. Every action left an emotional mark that would endure long after the night ended. Chaos was a constant companion. People jostled for position, pushing and being pushed, guided by the urgency of survival. Staff tried to maintain order, but the human element was unpredictable. Some listened. Others ignored instructions, guided by instinct to protect family or themselves. Amidst the confusion, small acts of heroism emerged. A stranger carried a child while a mother navigated the stairs. A father offered his spot in a lifeboat to a young woman clutching an infant. These decisions were made in split seconds but resonated profoundly. Parents learned quickly that perfect solutions didn't exist. Every choice involved trade-offs. Every decision felt like failure in some form. Survival came wrapped in guilt. Life itself became a negotiation between hope and heartbreak. Children remained the silent priority. Even in panic, parents and guardians focused on their safety. Arms tightened, steps measured, voices calm. Protecting the youngest became an instinctive company. Adults acted as shields, barriers, and guides. Some families faced separation despite every effort. Crowded decks, limited lifeboat capacity, and the chaos of movement made complete unity impossible. Even when holding hands, a sudden shift of the crowd could pull them apart. Fear magnified every moment. Faith played a quiet role. Hands folded, prayers whispered, songs hummed softly, all latte. MPTs to impose hope on chaos. Adults clung to ritual as a way to steady trembling hearts and children's fears. Every whispered word was a tiny anchor in the storm. The night revealed the limits of human control. Titanic's size and might meant little against ice, water, and panic. Even the strongest, bravest adults felt powerless. Yet they acted anyway. Every choice, no matter how impossible, was made with courage. By the time some passengers reached lifeboats, the weight of decisions lingered. Parents had acted, protected, sacrificed, and endured. Their choices were unseen, unrecorded, but profound. They had faced the impossible and moved forward anyway. Mothers, fathers, and guardians learned a truth no one should have to. Survival is rarely fair. It demands sacrifice. It asks questions that cannot be answered, and it rewards courage in the smallest, quietest ways. Through the lives held, the children saved, and the hands extended when every instinct screamed to pull back. The night pressed on, cold and relentless, but the human spirit persisted. Every step, every decision, every act of love and bravery carried forward. Titanic moved through the dark Atlantic, and below, the people. On her decks faced the ultimate test of heart, resolve, and impossible choices. By the time third-class passengers reached the upper decks, the lifeboats became the focus of every eye. They promised survival, yet they also revealed a painful truth: inequality was alive even in the chaos. The golden illusion of Titanic as unsinkable had shattered, and with it, the fragile barrier between safety and danger became painfully visible. The lifeboats were fewer than anyone expected. Some were already being lowered, filled with passengers from first and second class. The ropes creaked, the wood groaned, but still, the sense of order above deck was maintained, though only for those who had access. Third-class passengers were forced to wait. Corridors funneling upward were crowded, and the gates and stairways slowed them further. It wasn't just physical space, it was an invisible line, again showing how class shaped opportunity. Those with tickets for upper decks had quicker access. Those below had to fight through barriers, both literal and societal, to reach safety. Adults tried to stay calm, guiding children, holding hands, keeping groups together. Every second felt like an eternity. Some people grew desperate. They shouted, begged, or pushed, but for the most part, chaos was tempered by cooperation. Strangers helped strangers because they knew no one would survive alone. The disparity was heartbreaking. First and second-class passengers were often led straight to boats, sometimes even assisted by staff. Their wealth, an D status, represented by their cabin location or the crew's recognition, meant faster boarding. Third-class passengers, by contrast, navigated confusing corridors, locked gates, and slower-moving crowds. Survival became unequal. Parents faced impossible decisions. Should they let older children try to reach a lifeboat ahead of them? Could they trust strangers to help? Every move required calculati, and faith in human kindness that was not guaranteed. The inequality was stark, and it was terrifying. Children sensed tension instantly. They clung to adults, unaware of social class but aware of fear. Mothers whispered encouragement, fathers measured steps carefully, always watching for danger. Every inch closer to a lifeboat felt like progress, but also like a race against time and circumstance. Some third-class passengers were denied access entirely at first. Crew members followed instructions, often rigidly, sometimes unwillingly. Language barriers, unfamiliarity with the decks, and class distinctions all combined to delay families already exhausted from the climb. Within this chaos, courage emerged. Strangers lifted children over railings, Adults held doors open, cleared pathways. ND shared space in ways that defied the cruel inequality of the moment. Small acts of humanity became lifelines. Every extended hand mattered. The boats themselves were a cruel mirror of the world. Some were filled almost entirely with first-class passengers. Others carried second class. By the time third-class passengers reached them, the boats were often nearly full. Some families had to make do. Tea-wrenching choices, wait for another boat, or try to squeeze in. Adults calculated weight, space, and the likelihood of survival in seconds. Desperation mingled with hope. When a lifeboat appeared to have room, parents guided children forward. Adults sometimes stayed behind to allow younger passengers a better chance. Decisions were quiet, unspoken, made in the gaze of another, sometimes in silence. Every act of selflessness carried emotional weight heavier than the physical strain of the journey. The cold night amplified fear. Wind cut through clothing, and the salty air stung eyes. Waves lapped against the hull, reminding everyone of the vast danger beneath them. Safety was no longer abstract, it was literal, immediate, and limited. Inequality shaped not only who boarded first, but also who survived the night. Titanic's design, societal expectations, and the location of cabins all played a role in determining fate. Third-class passengers were reminded that even in disaster, privilege mattered. Yet amidst despair, resilience endured. Families worked together. Strangers became allies. Courage became a quiet force that cut across class lines. The inequality was real, but it was enged in small human ways, holding a child, sharing space, guiding the lost. By the time third-class passengers found lifeboats, they had learned something vital. Survival depended on vigilance, cooperation, and courage, but also on the cruel randomness of circumstance. Inequality had shaped the night, but humanity still shone through. The lifeboats would carry some to safety and leave others bay. The disparity was tragic, but the bravery of those navigating chaos, parents, children, strangers, remained a testament to endurance, love, and the instinct to survive against impossible odds. Even in inequality, moments of humanity endured, flickering like small lanterns in the cold Atlantic night. For every passenger who reached the lifeboats, there were many who never did, the ones left behind. ND were not forgotten. They were part of Titanic's story, their lives and struggles echoing through the lower decks and across the Atlantic. A silent reminder of how fragile life can be. Third-class passengers faced the harshest reality. Even after climbing stairs, navigating gates and reaching the upper decks, not everyone could board a lifeboat. Space ran out, decisions had been made for them. Some were held back by exhaustion, some by the weight of children, and some by circumstance they could not control. Parents clutched their children, whispered promises that they would survive, tried to shield them from fear, but even the strongest arms could not hold back fate. Families were separated, strangers were lost, and quiet acts of bravery went unseen. The ones who never made it were often ordinary people, mothers, fathers, children, young men and women travelling for a new life. Many had dreams and plans, hopes for tomorrow that ended abruptly in the cold night. Their stories were not recorded in headlines or photographs, only in the memory of those who survived and in the silent wake of the ship. Fear grew as the ship listed and the water rose. People realized that no more time could be wasted. Every delay, every locked gate, every obstacle became more than inconvenience. It became a potential death sentence. The quiet hope that had carried passengers through hours of uncertainty began to thin. In those final moments, courage appeared in small, desperate acts. A father handed his child to a stranger climbing a rope. A mother clutched her infant and whispered, "Go, be safe." Hands reached out, eyes pleaded for understanding, but the Atlantic did not answer. It claimed what it would, indifferent to promises, plans, and tears. Children sensed more than adults sometimes realized. They saw hesitation, the tension, the sudden absence of a parent or sibling. Some were lifted to lifeboats while adults remained behind. Some fell behind entirely, clinging to hope that someone would return. But the night offered no such mercy. The crew worked tirelessly, yet even their best efforts could not save everyone. Lifeboat capacity, the speed of events, and the sheer scale of the disaster meant that some passengers were doomed from the moment the iceberg struck. It was a cruel truth, impossible to avoid. Those left behind faced cold, dark water and a long, terrifying wait. Some ride to help each other, forming clusters to stay afloat or maintain morale. Others were swept away quickly, claimed by waves or lost in confusion. The human instinct to survive remained, but it could not always triumph. The night was long, and silence hung heavy after chaos. The absence of those who never made it was felt in every corner of the ship and beyond. Families mourned immediately free. NDS realized the impossible truth, and the lucky survivors carried grief along with relief. Memory became a quiet lifeboat for those who remained. Stories of courage, small acts of kindness, whispered words and laughter shared in fleeting moments became a way to honor the fallen. Even in tragedy, the humanity of those who never made it continued to exist in the hearts of the living. The ship car. The weight of its losses silently across the Atlantic. Each person who had not survived left behind a story, a dream, a hope that would never be realized. Their absence shaped the night, the survivors, and the way the world would remember Titanic forever. In the end, it was a stark lesson in fragility. Life could be interrupted in an instant, and circumstances, no matter how small. A gate lock. A lifeboat full, a choice made too late, could decide who lived and who did not. Yet even in their absence, those who never made it were not forgotten. Their courage, patience, and humanity remained. Third-class passengers, struggling to survive, remembered them quietly, carried their stories forward, and honored them simply by continuing to fight through the night. The Atlantic took the ship. It could not take memory. It could not erase bravery. It could not silence hope. Even in the darkest hours, when the nightmare ended and dawn broke over the icy Atlantic, the survivors of Titanic carried more than cold, wet clothes. They carried stories, voices trembling, hearts heavy. They told of what they had seen, what they had felt, and what they had lost. For third-class passengers, survivor, had come at a cost. Families were broken, children separated, strangers lost. Every person who reached safety had witnessed fear, courage, and heartbreak in ways few could imagine. And now their voices became the link between what happened on that ship and the world that had to hear it. Some spoke quietly, almost as if sharing their experience aloud might make it unreal. They described the climb, to the upper decks, the locked gates, the scramble for lifeboats. They told how strangers helped each other, how mothers and fathers made impossible decisions, how children clung to life with wide eyes and stubborn determination. Others spoke with anger or sorrow, unable to hide frustration at the unfairness of the situation. Why had class mattered so much when survival was at stake? Why had some reached safety easily while others were trapped by doors and corridors? Their voices carried grief, but also a need for the world to understand the truth. Laughter appeared too. Not carefree, but small and fragile, moments of humanity that had survived the terror. A shared joke in the lifeboat, a song hummed to calm a child, a whispered reassurance to a stranger. These tiny sparks of normalcy, saved hearts when everything else threatened to break them. Each voice added texture to the story of Titanic. Together they created a chorus of experience, fear, hope, courage, loss, and resilience. Newspapers would write headlines, families would mourn, and history would record facts, but only the survivors' voices could truly capture what it felt like below decks, among the ones who had to fig. Every step to live. Many survivors spoke of the invisible barriers, the locked gates, and the way life and death had been distributed unevenly. They remembered who had helped them, who had saved themselves, and who had been left behind. The memory of those moments shaped them, leaving marks that would never fully fade. Children who survived would later tell stories in simple words, describing adventure and terror together. Parents shared memories of quiet heroism, moments when humanity shone brightest. Even strangers became part of these recollections. Handshakes offered blankets, guidance through confusion. Each act mattered in the memory of survival. Faith, music, and small joys were recalled too. A lullaby hummed in the corner, a prayer whispered quietly while standing on the da. A shared slice of bread during hours of uncertainty. These small moments were not heroic in the traditional sense, but they sustained people when danger was absolute. Some voices were haunted, repeating the impossible choices they had made. Who to save, who to leave, what to risk. Guilt mingled with relief, sorrow with thankfulness. Adults carried these memories with quiet dignity, often never, speaking them aloud, yet letting them shape how they lived after. Yet even in trauma, the survivors' voices offered lessons. Courage isn't always loud. Bravery isn't always heroic in the way books describe. Sometimes it's a hand extended, a child held, a moment of calm offered in chaos. Their stories reminded the world that humanity persisted, even when the worst happened. These voices ensured that the people of third class were not forgotten. Not just as passengers, but as human beings, dreamers, parents, children, travellers, whose experiences mattered. Their stories were the bridge between memory and history, between tragedy and understanding. And so the survivors spoke, quietly and loudly, humbly and painfully, so that the voices of those lost could be heard too. Through them, Titanic's night became more than facts and figures. It became the story of courage, love, despair, and endurance. The story of humans navigating fear, inequality, and impossible choices in the face of an unforgiving ocean. Even decades later, these voices continue to echo, reminding us that survival is not just about reaching safety, it's about remembering, honouring, and sharing what it truly means to live and the world falls apart around you. Titanic is remembered for its grandeur, its tragedy, and its unsinkable reputation. Headlines, books, and films have captured the disaster, but much of what happened, especially below decks in third class, remains overlooked. History remembers the ship. History often forgets the people who lived and died in its shadows. Third-class passengers were not merely numbers. They were parents, children, labourers, dreamers, people travelling for hope, opportunity, or reunion with family. Their lives were filled with courage, resilience, and small acts of humanity that history rarely records. The meticulous schedules, the quiet songs, the whispered prayers, the shared laughter in the hallways. All these details were invisible to the public eye. The barriers that separated passengers by class, locked gates, limited access, delayed lifeboat boarding, are remembered in some NTS, but rarely is the human cost fully acknowledged. Families were torn apart, parents made impossible choices, and children clung to strangers for safety. These experiences were intensely personal, yet they were quickly summarized in statistics: lives lost, lives saved. The nuance, the daily realities, the emotional weight, all too often vanished in the telling. History also forgets the small, yet heroism that occurred daily. A stranger carrying a child to safety, parents protecting children from fear, families sharing blankets and food when resources were scarce, humor in moments of terror, songs hummed to soothe nerves. These were not dramatic headlines, but they mattered. They defined survival, courage, and humanity in ways that fame and luxury could not. Third-class passengers also left behind stories of endurance. Even when trapped below decks, they adapted to challenges, navigating narrow corridors, climbing staircases, and overcoming the obstacles of locked gates. Every small act of cooperation, kindness, and clever problem-solving was history in motion, but often went unrecorded. What history forgot most of all was their perspective. While the upper decks received admiration, and sympathy, the voices of third-class passengers were quieter, yet they provide a vital lens into the disaster. The fear of being trapped, the instinctive courage required to climb and survive, and the resilience that allowed strangers to become allies in the most impossible circumstances. Even after Titanic sank, the stories of third-class passengers continued to fade. Survivor carried memory in their hearts, but public recognition was limited. Their contributions, their struggles, their humanity were overshadowed by the spectacle of wealth, technology, and headline-grabbing heroics, and yet their stories are essential. They remind us that tragedy is not defined by class or privilege. It is defined by how humans respond under pressure, how they protect one another, how they hope when hope seems impossible, and how they act with courage even when the odds are stacked against them. By remembering what history forgot, we honor the lives that went unnoticed in the grand narratives, the mothers and fathers, the children, the laborers, the immigrants, people who faced terror with dignity. Thank you who struggled to survive with whatever strength they had, and whose voices, though often lost, continue to echo in memory and story. Titanic may have been a ship, but its true legacy lies in its people. The ones history forgot are the ones who teach us the most about humanity, about bravery, compassion, and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And in remembering them, we reclaim a part of history that was nearly erased by time, class, and circumstance. The story of Titanic is often told through grandeur and tragedy, through the luxury of the upper decks and the heroics of the few. But the real lessons, the ones that echo long after the ship sank, come from the lowest decks, where third-class passengers faced danger, fear, and uncertainty head-on. Life below decks was harsh even before the iceberg struck. Crowded bunks, limited food, strict rules, and invisible barriers defined daily existence. Yet within these challenges, passengers developed resilience, cooperation, and a quiet strength that the upper decks never fully understood. In hindsight, those traits became the blueprint for survival when disaster struck. One lesson is the power of community. In confined spaces, Opal relied on one another. Neighbors became allies. Strangers became helpers. Shared hardship fostered trust and teamwork that no individual could manage alone. The survival of third-class passengers often depended on this cooperation, on hands extended, shoulders offered, and small acts of kindness that could save a life. Another lesson is the value of courage under pressure. Parents carried chill, dren, lifted them over obstacles, and made impossible decisions with little time to think. Children adapted, even thrived in ways that amazed adults. Every step upward, every choice to trust a stranger, every calm whisper in panic was an act of courage. Courage was not always loud. It was persistent, practical, and often invisible. Third-class passengers also teach the importance of adaptability. Locked gates, confusing stairways, and crowded corridors forced them to improvise. They learned to navigate the ship efficiently, to assess risk quickly, and to act decisively in moments where hesitation could mean death. Life below deck had prepared them for unpredictability in ways that wealth or privilege could not. Faith and small joys mattered more than luxury. Songs hummed softly, prayers were whispered, and laughter shared in fleeting moments sustained spirits. Even when the cold, dark night seemed overwhelming, these small comforts offered strength. They remind us that humanity persists not only in survival, but in the ways we maintain hope and connection amidst fear. Inequality left a painful mark. Third-class passengers faced delays, limited lifeboat access, and harsh restrictions. Yet, these obstacles did not break their resolve. They adapted and persisted. The lessons are clear. Life is often unfair, but resilience, courage, and cooperation can create opportunities where none seem to exist. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is perspective. History often celebrates wealth, status, or technology, but the experiences of the lowest deck show that human endurance, empathy, and resourcefulness defines survival and legacy. The people who lived, the people who died, and the people who tried their best all carry stories that matter equally. Finally, the lowest deck reminds us of our shared humanity. In a disaster that ignored class, the actions of ordinary people shone brightest. The mothers and fathers, the children, the strangers helping each other. These are the voices that teach us empathy, courage, and hope. The Titanic sank, but the lessons from the lowest deck endure. They are reminders that bravery is often quiet, that humanity thrives in the smallest gestures, and that survival is as much about spirit as circumstance. If we carry these lessons forward, we honor the memory of those who lived, those who died, and those whose stories history almost forgot. Titanic may have been a ship, but its true legacy lies in the courage and resilience of the people on the lowest deck, and in the lessons they left for the world.